This voice is artificial, but the ideas are real. Welcome to AI Podcast. Now, let's begin.
December 4th, 2024. It's a crisp, cold day in Midtown Manhattan. Brian Thompson, who is the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, is shot and killed right outside a hotel.
It was an absolutely shocking event, of course, but what made it instantly historic, I think, was the identity of the victim, the target.
Right.
Thompson was the leader of United Health Group. This is the largest health insurer in the United States, a corporation that covers, over 50 million people?
50 million?
So this act of violence aimed squarely at the figurehead of an industry under just intense public scrutiny. It immediately stopped being just a homicide investigation. It became a societal flashpoint.
And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive for you today. The stack of sources we have here it's immense. We're looking at everything from the meticulous police timeline to the suspect's alleged personal writings, his online history.
And then there's the public reaction. The social media analysis is just off the charts. It was a fever pitch.
Plus the economic fallout, which was brutal and immediate. It forces us and you to look beyond a simple true crime story and really analyze what feels like a genuine moral earthquake.
The complexity is really staggering because the killing itself, the act, it immediately shifted the national conversation. It stopped being solely about the alleged perpetrator, Luigi Mangione, and it started being about the practices, the ethics, and the profits of the entire for-profit insurance industry.
So right from the jump, we have two completely polarized narratives that we have to unpack. On one side, you have the corporate perspective, which was amplified, almost immediately by mainstream media.
And that narrative sought to condemn the act as isolated random madness, an act committed by a lone radical. The goal there was simple. Full legal condemnation.
And then on the other side, you have this widespread, truly unprecedented public sentiment. It seemed to be fueled by millions of people's personal painful experiences with healthcare denials.
And that sentiment framed the killing in many, many corners as what criminologists were very quick to label symbolic retribution.
So our mission here today is not to judge the act itself, but to understand the competing evidence. We need to analyze the specific details surrounding Mangione, his history of chronic illness, his political radicalization.
And maybe more importantly, to understand why. Why this one tragic event provided the catalyst for such an intense and complex national reflection.
Okay, so let's start by establishing the timeline of the incident itself. As we said, Thompson was killed on December 4th, and all the evidence suggests this was absolutely not a crime of opportunity.
No, far from it. The planning seems meticulous, almost obsessive. And it seems aimed at maximizing not just the physical act, but the psychological and symbolic impact.
And we know this because of the alleged notebook entries that the authorities recovered.
Exactly. One entry in particular, it was dated 2022, so about 6 weeks before the shooting. It specifically mentioned an intent to whack the CEO of one of the major insurance companies.
And he specified the timing.
He did. He said it should happen during their investor conference.
That timing is just so crucial because December 4th wasn't just a random day. It was the exact date of United Health Group's investor conference in New York City.
It suggests the target wasn't just Brian Thompson, the man, but Brian Thompson, the symbol, targeted precisely at the moment his company was on stage, publicly celebrating its financial success and its returns to investors.
A celebration of profits.
A celebration of profits. And this focus on symbolism, it leads us to the most critical piece of evidence found at the crime scene.
Lying right there next to the victim?
Yes, bullet casings. But they were inscribed with three words that immediately reframed the entire event for everyone.
Right. Those words were deny, defend, depose.
It's not just a collection of random angry words. The twisted brilliance of that phrase is that it immediately connects the act to this deep-seated frustration that millions of Americans feel every single day.
Let's really unpack the significance of that phrase for a moment, because it works as this dark, perfect parody of the industry's own business model.
It does. For years, the informal internal motto that's been used by insurance companies to maximize profit, to minimize claim payouts, has been delay, deny, defend.
Delay, deny, defend. Let's break that down.
Well, delay is simple. You delay the process long enough that the patient gets sicker, or maybe they just give up. You create friction.
Deny.
You deny the claim outright. Doesn't matter if it has merit or not. You deny it to test the patient's resolve, to see if they have the energy or the resources to fight back.
And finally, defend.
And then you legally defend that denial through lengthy, incredibly costly legal battles, which most individual policyholders simply cannot afford to undertake. They're outgunned from the start.
So Mangione's alleged alteration of that phrase, it's very specific. He replaces delay with another deny, which highlights the aggressive nature of it. But the most important change is the final word. He changes defend, defending the corporation, to depose.
To depose. To forcibly remove someone from office, from power. I mean, the semantic shift there is so highly charged. It suggests the motivation wasn't just simple revenge or personal rage.
It's political.
It's a clear political act. It's about symbolically overthrowing a system, a regime. It transforms a murder into a kind of public, highly personalized execution of a corporate representative.
And this is why criminologists, right out of the gate, they focused on the political nature of the crime, not the pathological.
From the moment those casings were found, the crime scene became political theater.
So let's look at the preparation. To pull off such a public act and then get away, at least initially, takes careful, methodical steps. The timeline from the AP shows that.
It does. The night before the shooting, around 11 p.m., Mangione took a taxi to the HI New York City hostel.
A hostel, not a hotel.
A hostel. And he allegedly checked in under a fake identity. Sources suggest he used names like Mark Rosario or maybe Sam Dawson.
That detail is genuinely fascinating to me. A hostel. It underscores this attempt at absolute anonymity in the hours leading up to the act. He's in a bunk bedroom, sharing space with multiple strangers.
And he consistently kept his mask on, even around his roommates.
Which must have been strange for them.
Very. That level of concealment is unusual, even for someone trying to lay low. But there was one crucial slip-up. It is all captured on surveillance footage.
He briefly lowered his mask for the desk clerk in the lobby.
For just a second, but provided that fleeting moment of clarity that police later used to generate the image they circulated so widely during the manhunt.
1 microsecond of exposure.
And it compromised days of careful evasion. It's incredible.
And despite that initial success in getting away, the manhunt was actually quite brief. 5 days later, on December 9th, Mangione was arrested.
And the arrest itself is almost absurdly mundane when you think about the scale of the crime. He was arrested in Altoona, Pennsylvania.
How was he found?
He was recognized by an alert employee at a McDonald's, who then tipped off the police. Just think about that. The target of a national manhunt, the man who sparked this massive social earthquake, was apprehended at a fast food restaurant hundreds of miles from the scene.
And when they arrested him, what did they find?
Authorities found several key items. Another fake ID, a weapon they described as similar to the one used in the killing, and significantly, a silencer.
And a manifesto.
And an alleged 262-word manifesto, yes.
The contents of that manifesto, along with the notebook, they immediately provided the narrative framework that connected his alleged actions to this profound sense of systemic frustration.
But we didn't have to wait for the documents to be fully analyzed to hear the motive. We heard it straight from the source.
That's right. When he was brought into the courthouse for his arraignment, a chaotic scene, Luigi Mangione, without any prompting, just publicly shouted.
He shouted that the media coverage was completely out of touch.
And an insult to the intelligence of the American people and their lived experience.
That moment, right there, it perfectly encapsulates the chasm we're talking about. The suspect wasn't just defending himself. He was articulating a political rationale. He was essentially telling the world that his actions should be viewed through the lens of ordinary Americans' daily struggles against the system, not through the traditional lens of criminal reporting.
So let's talk about that lens, because the intensity of the public reaction, especially the support he got, it's impossible to understand without looking closely at who Luigi Mangione was before all this.
Right.
On the surface, I mean, he was the definition of success, of privilege, a golden boy.
Absolutely. He was born in Towson, Maryland, into a very prominent, very wealthy family. His grandfather was a major real estate developer. He attended the Gilman School, which is a highly prestigious all-boys prep school.
And he wasn't just a student there?
No, he was an academic standout. He was the valedictorian of his 2016 class.
And that high achievement just continued. He goes straight to the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League institution, and manages to get dual degrees.
A Bachelor of Science in Engineering and a Master of Science in Engineering, both in computer science and cognitive science. And he completed both by 2020.
I mean, this is the trajectory of someone who is destined for the C-suite. He could have been an executive in a system very similar to the one he allegedly targeted.
But the sources we've reviewed, they revealed his deep, complex, and incredibly painful personal narrative that just violently ruptured that trajectory.
Huh.
And this is where this profile becomes genuinely tragic and ultimately where it becomes radicalized.
His online writings, they provide extensive documentation of just severe chronic health struggles that began long before the shooting.
A long, long time before.
Mhm.
He battled Lyme disease from the age of 13. He suffered from irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, and he had a truly debilitating neurological condition called visual snow syndrome.
Can you describe that? What is that?
Visual snow syndrome, or VSS. Imagine your entire field of vision is constantly obscured by persistent flickering dots, like television static. It's always there. It makes focusing, reading, even just existing incredibly difficult.
And that was on top of the central physical issue.
Yes. The central issue was spondylolisthesis. It's a condition where one vertebra in your spine slips forward out of alignment with one below it.
That sounds excruciating.
It causes severe, debilitating chronic back pain. And his was allegedly aggravated by a surfing accident while he was living in Hawaii for a time. The pain was apparently so intense that he underwent spinal fusion surgery in July of 2023.
And it's the combination of that physical suffering and the resulting cognitive impact that I think truly humanizes his alleged motivation. He wrote extensively about chronic brain fog that began in high school.
A symptom that made the high-level analytical work required at an institution like UPenn nearly impossible. He wrote that it almost forced him to drop out.
And he used chess as his personal metric for mental acuity.
He did. He noted that before the chronic pain and the brain fog really took hold, he was highly analytical, very strategic. Afterward, he wrote that playing chess became impossible. He said he could never remember any strategy long enough to execute a single move.
So you have this highly intelligent person who is watching his greatest asset, his own mind, just degrade under the weight of illness.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And he directly connected this personal degradation to the system he was trying to navigate for help. This chronic struggle gave him an acute, almost cynical awareness of the healthcare system's priorities.
Which he detailed in his writings.
Very explicitly. In one post, he advised other people who were dealing with chronic medical issues to stop describing their unbearable pain to doctors. Instead, he told them they must frame their suffering using what he called capitalist keywords. He specifically advised them to tell providers that they are unable to work.
Why? Why that specific phrase?
Because he found, through his own experience, that the medical industry, which is deeply intertwined with the insurance industry, responds far more urgently to concepts of lost productivity and economic cost than they do to simple descriptions of human suffering or, impact on quality of life.
Wow. So that shows an intellect that's focused on exploiting the very system he hated. Just to get help, he had to learn its language.
He had to learn its language. So you have this collision. You have immense personal pain. You have deep frustration with a system that only seems to recognize economic worth. And you have a highly analytical mind that is searching for an ideological framework to make sense of, to rationalize that pain.
And that led, maybe predictably, to philosophical radicalization.
It did. The sources show a clear embrace of anti-systemic thought. Most controversially, through his 4-star review of Ted Kaczynski's Industrial Society and Its Future.
The Unabomber Manifesto.
The Unabomber Manifesto. The review was found linked to his accounts.
That's a dark connection to make.
It is a complex and dark connection. But in his review, Mangione conceded that Kaczynski was a violent individual who belonged in prison. He wasn't glorifying him. But he viewed the Unabomber's actions not as simple madness, but as those of an extreme political revolutionary.
So he was separating the man from the ideas.
To a degree. He went so far as to call the Manifesto's predictions about the dehumanizing nature of modern industrial society prescient. He was drawing an intellectual line between his own personal distress and a much broader societal critique.
And that critique seems to be perfectly encapsulated in a philosophical observation he favored. A quote from Jiddu Krishnamurti.
It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
That idea, it really feels like the engine of his alleged action.
I think so. And when you synthesize this entire profile, the high achievement, the agonizing physical decline, the sense of intellectual purity, and then the political radicalization, we start to recognize a familiar, if tragic, historical pattern.
What's the pattern?
This is often the profile of highly educated individuals who frame deeply personal grievances as evidence of systemic corruption. They rationalize extreme acts as a form of political necessity. We see echoes of this in groups like the Red Army faction in Germany, whose members were often drawn from university.
Or other revolutionary traditions.
It's exactly. Or historical revolutionary traditions, like in early 20th century Russia, that drew from an intellectual elite who felt betrayed by modern society.
It suggests the alleged act wasn't just a simple breakdown. It was a final, desperate attempt to turn a private tragedy, his chronic pain, into a public political statement against the institutions that he felt had failed him.
Now, we need to pivot and ask, what was the institutional context that Mangione was reacting to? The target was UnitedHealthcare, the very embodiment of for-profit healthcare in America.
And this brings us right back to that fundamental conflict that defines the entire system.
The conflict is structural. It's built in. Insurance companies are legally required to maximize profits for their shareholders. That is their fiduciary duty.
So in a system where they make money by collecting premiums and save money by not paying claims?
The incentive is always to deny care. This is the operational reality that created the delay, deny, defend philosophy. It's not an accident. It's a feature of the business model.
And Brian Thompson's legacy, as detailed in the sources, was closely tied to intensifying this structural conflict.
Very much so. Under his leadership, UnitedHealthcare became the subject of a massive class action lawsuit, and it specifically alleged the use of an innovative and highly controversial AI denial system.
This is a detail that deserves a lot of focus. The class action lawsuit claimed that this AI system, which was utilized to automatically review and deny claims for post-acute care,
had an error rate that was, according to the lawsuit, 90%.
90%, 90. I mean, let's just sit with that for a second. 9 out of 10 denials issued by this automated algorithm were eventually reversed upon appeal.
Let's think about the real-world implications of a 90% error rate. It means the vast majority of claims that were rejected by this machine were, in fact, medically necessary and should have been approved from the start.
So the system wasn't optimizing for medical accuracy?
It was optimizing for friction. The goal was to place insurmountable bureaucratic hurdles in the way of patients seeking care. They knew that a significant percentage of people, especially those who are already ill or elderly or financially strained, would simply give up the fight.
And that delay, even if the denial is ultimately reversed months later, can result in immense suffering, bankruptcy.
Or even death, depending on the immediacy of the required treatment. The lawsuit effectively argued that the AI was a denial mechanism wrapped in the guise of efficiency.
And yet, in the face of this very specific, data-driven systemic critique, UnitedHealth Group's CEO, Andrew Whitty, penned an essay in the New York Times right after the assassination.
And he attempted to reframe Thompson's legacy entirely.
How so?
Whitty portrayed Thompson as a brilliant, kind man and stated he was working to make healthcare better for everyone. This narrative completely glossed over the 90% error rate and the class action allegations.
Instead, it attempted to humanize the victim while simultaneously deflecting blame for systemic flaws onto a vague, what was the phrase? A flawed patchwork built over decades.
Right. It's everyone's fault, and therefore no one's fault.
And that clash between the facts on the ground, the lawsuit detailing these demonstrably harmful practices, and the corporate narrative claiming the CEO was a humanitarian, that's precisely what gave fuel to the public outrage and the polarized reaction.
Now, if we set aside the moral dimension for just a moment, the assassination had immediate and highly measurable economic consequences.
Thompson's fatal shooting led to a significant immediate drop in stock prices for UnitedHealth Group itself.
But the impact wasn't contained to just one firm. It was bigger than that. There was a notable spillover effect across the entire health insurance industry. It reflected investor panic and, I think, regulatory fear.
And researchers jumped on this immediately.
They did. Academic researchers immediately analyzed this economic shock using what is called event study methodology.
Okay, can you break that down for us? For listeners who aren't in finance, what does that actually mean?
Sure. An event study basically works by establishing a baseline for how a company's stock should perform on a normal day, accounting for general market trends. Then you isolate a massive singular event, in this case the assassination, and you measure the abnormal return. Was it higher or lower than it should have been?
So they were essentially treating the killing as a pure shockwave and measuring its ripple effect.
Exactly. And their core hypothesis was critical. They theorized that the most glamorous firms, the ones with the highest profit margins and revenue growth, the firms most visible to and, frankly, hated by the public, would suffer the most negative cumulative abnormal returns.
Their thinking being that investors would anticipate that public anger would translate into regulatory risk for the biggest corporate villains.
And that hypothesis proved to be largely correct. The market reaction suggested that investors were instantly factoring in public sentiment as a tangible economic risk. Thompson's death signaled to the market that the practices of the most profitable insurers might now face new, punitive consequences.
And we have concrete proof that this fear was immediately internalized by the industry itself.
We do. Soon after the assassination, a major corporate entity, Blue Cross Blue Shield, BCBS, they reversed a recently announced and very controversial policy regarding anesthesia payments.
This is an absolutely crucial detail. It shows the direct influence of the event. BCBS had quietly announced a policy that would effectively limit payment for anesthesia during specific routine procedures.
Things like colonoscopies or certain endoscopies.
The implication of that policy was devastating for patients. It would have forced them either to undergo incredibly painful procedures without sufficient sedation or to pay significant unexpected out-of-pocket costs, even for a procedure deemed preventative.
It was a classic cost-cutting move that prioritized profit over patient comfort and basic health.
And the fact that BCBS reversed this policy in the immediate wake of Thompson's death suggests they saw the writing on the wall. They viewed the new public climate as just too dangerous to proceed with these highly unpopular claim-denying measures.
So that singular act of violence achieved what years of lawsuits, lobbying, and patient complaints had completely failed to do.
It forced a major corporate decision-maker to reverse a harmful cost-saving policy in real time, purely out of fear of public and political backlash.
The public response to the Mangione case moved almost instantly from shock to this really complex polarization. Luigi Mangione quickly became, as one outlet put it, the most debated and polarizing murder suspect in recent history.
The reaction was so swift and so highly charged, especially online. Within days, he was being celebrated in certain communities not as a criminal, but as a folk hero.
A folk hero, a sex symbol in some corners, and frequently compared to a modern-day Robin Hood, a figure who targeted the corporate elite on behalf of the suffering masses.
And this wasn't just, idle online chatter. This support manifested in very concrete, physical ways.
The hashtag #FreeLuigi trended massively. It was shared tens of thousands of times. And the public support was geographic. It crossed borders. We saw public graffiti supporting him in New York City, and then, surprisingly, in Italy and France.
And there was even a highly publicized billboard erected in California.
And this public sentiment wasn't just anecdotal. It was actually quantified. A December 2024 NORC poll found that a majority of American adults believe that the health insurance companies' denial practices and their massive profits shared a moderate or great deal of responsibility for Thompson's death.
So that polling data confirms that the widespread support for Mangione wasn't just about radical politics. It was inextricably linked to a collective negative judgment of the healthcare system's actual practices.
Which explains why that core slogan resonated so deeply. We know the alleged casing said, "Deny, defend, depose," parroting the industry's delay, deny, defend.
But the public really latched onto that last word.
They really did. The public quickly internalized the depose part. That word, meaning to forcibly remove a powerful figure, it turned the phrase into an anthem against the current regime. The public understood that the attack wasn't personal, it was aimed at the crown.
So faced with this overwhelming wave of popular support, which fundamentally legitimized the systemic critique he was making, the mainstream media and corporate interests, they responded.
They responded with a major counteroffensive designed to control the narrative.
This strategy was multifaceted, but it really began at the top. The UnitedHealth Group CEO, Andrew Whitty's guest essay in the New York Times, which we mentioned earlier, served as a prime example of what many critics immediately called unctuous propaganda.
The essay was engineered to be emotionally compelling. Whitty emphasized Thompson's humble roots, his start in Iowa, his jobs on a farm, to humanize him and make the listener sympathize with the victim's family, which is, of course, entirely understandable.
But there was a secondary, more critical function there.
Deflection, exactly. Whitty used the emotional resonance of the tragedy to deflect systemic blame. He made a token acknowledgement that the U.S. health system is complex and flawed, but he framed it as a result of that flawed patchwork built over decades.
Rather than acknowledging the deliberate, systematic profit extraction driven by his own corporation,
he even went so far as to defend the necessity of claim denials, suggesting the only necessary change was to improve how we explain what insurance covers, rather than changing the actual harmful denial decisions themselves.
So instead of talking about the 90% error rate of their AI, the public conversation was shifted to talking about Thompson's kindness or his Iowa roots.
But the most aggressive tactic of narrative control, I think, was the outright attempt to discredit Mangione's supporters entirely. They tried to associate them with historical figures of genuine, unadulterated evil.
Right. These quick, cheaply produced documentaries like TMZ's Luigi Mangione, The Mind of a Killer, jumped into this space with highly prejudiced language.
They explicitly labeled Mangione a killer. They speculated about him being a sociopath before any trial had even occurred, which is a flagrant violation of the fundamental journalistic standard of presumed innocence.
They were poisoning the well.
They were poisoning the well of public discourse and potentially prejudicing any future jury pool. And the supporters themselves were attacked directly.
How so?
They were described using these very judgmental, moralizing terms. One piece said they subscribed to a sick and perverted ideology.
And the ABC 2020 documentary went even further. They compared the public fascination and support for Mangione to the fan clubs that emerged around serial killers like Charles Manson and Ted Bundy.
And this comparison is a clear psychological strategy. By drawing a false equivalence between a systemic political critique and the cult-like following of mass murderers, they attempt to create extreme moral distance.
The message being, if you support the critique, you are associated with the grotesque.
Precisely. And this pushes the focus back from any sense of corporate culpability to individual pathology, which is the exact narrative the corporation needs to survive unscathed.
So let's move from the battle for public opinion to the courtroom. The legal jeopardy facing Luigi Mangione is, it's existential.
It is. He was initially charged at the state level, including a very serious charge of first-degree murder in furtherance of terrorism, but those specific terror charges were later dismissed by a New York judge.
The state charges of second-degree murder remain, but the federal charges are what's truly paramount here.
That's right. Mangione faces 4 federal counts, including murder through the use of a firearm in a crime of violence, which carries a maximum penalty of death. This is why the case has become such an unprecedented flashpoint within the U.S. Department of Justice.
The defense team launched a vigorous motion to preclude the death penalty. They argued that the Attorney General's public directive to seek death, which was issued in April 2025, was fundamentally arbitrary.
And politically motivated. A direct breach of established DOJ death penalty protocol.
How did they ground that argument?
They grounded it in the precedent of capital cases within their jurisdiction, the Southern District of New York. Historically, these prosecutions have involved defendants who committed murder as part of, say, violent drug trafficking, racketeering, or large-scale terrorist organizations.
Like the case of Sayfullo Saipov.
Exactly. The defense pointed specifically to Saipov, who killed 8 people in a terrorist truck attack in furtherance of ISIS.
And they argued that Mangione's case, a single alleged victim tied to an ideological anti-corporate motive, committed outside the context of an organized violent group. It just doesn't fit the mold.
They said it fell so far outside the realm of previous SDNY death penalty pursuits that the decision to seek capital punishment must be political.
They directly accused the Attorney General of acting unabashedly for political reasons.
They did. They stated that the victim's high professional status as a CEO was the deciding factor, rather than the facts of the crime fitting the traditional violent criteria for the death penalty. They argued the administration was leveraging the case to send a specific chilling message to future anti-corporate radicals.
And in addition to challenging the penalty itself, the defense submitted an extensive profile to the capital case section outlining mitigating factors.
This was designed to paint a complete picture of an individual to counter that media narrative of an inherently evil sociopath.
And what did that profile emphasize?
It emphasized his high academic achievement valedictorian, the dual UPenn degrees, his complete lack of any prior violent history, and his identity as a loved member of a large, close, loving family.
So when you combine that with the severe chronic health struggles we discussed,
the defense is attempting to demonstrate that this was a crime born of desperation and ideological fervor, not of inherent malice or criminality. They're suggesting he's simply not the type of defendant the death penalty was designed for.
This intense legal battle, it naturally forced a profound philosophical reckoning in the public square, a debate about violence and accountability, particularly through the lens of what sociologists call moral distance.
Moral distance is a critical psychological concept to understand here. It describes the human tendency to judge indirect harm, say harm caused by bureaucratic policy, as less morally wrong than direct kinetic harm, like a physical assault.
Even if the indirect harm causes more suffering or more deaths.
Exactly. Our intuitive morality, it's wired to recoil from the physical act far more than from the administrative decision.
And this creates the profound dichotomy at the heart of the Mangione case. On one hand, you have Mangione's alleged violence, direct, kinetic, immediate, with a gun.
And you contrast that with what critics call the conceptual passive indirect violence of the healthcare industry. This is the corporate decision-making that results in the bureaucratic denial of thousands of legitimate claims, leading to preventable suffering, delayed treatment, and financial ruin.
This indirect harm is frequently viewed by critics as procedural murder, a type of violence that is protected by law and is difficult, if not impossible, to prosecute.
Right. And the overwhelming public sentiment that sprang up around this case argued that because the wealthy and powerful executives who financially benefit from systemic denial are immune from legal consequences for their systemic harms,
then fear and vigilantism become the only remaining mechanisms to reset things or force change.
it creates a deeply uncomfortable logic. Many supporters viewed Mangione's act as a form of necessary retribution. They argued that if you structure a system to profit immensely from the suffering and death of policyholders, and if that system is shielded from legal consequences, then the only effective lever remaining is the threat of personal physical violence.
They contend that if a system existed where the corporate actions that cause suffering were illegal and punishable by law, then vigilantism would lose its justification.
But since that system does not exist, the threat of violence, however tragic, becomes a tool for immediate systemic change.
And that fear, crystallized by one shocking act, immediately translated into regulatory policy change at Blue Cross Blue Shield and a stock market correction across the entire industry. That is a measurable political victory, regardless of the immense tragedy and criminality of the act itself.
So as we look back across this entire complex mosaic of evidence, the case of Luigi Mangione really is a tragic collision. A collision between a severely suffering, highly intelligent individual and a system designed to monetize human desperation.
It's the story of a young man ravaged by chronic pain and cognitive decline, who allegedly chose to frame his personal struggle as a revolutionary political act against what he viewed as a profoundly sick society.
And this collision was magnified tenfold by the highly polarized media coverage. You had corporate-aligned outlets rushing to brand Mangione as a killer and his supporters as morally sick,
While at the same time running PR essays from the UnitedHealth CEO designed to distract entirely from the documented 90% error rate of their own claim denial algorithms. The conversation was less about justice and more about narrative control.
Yet the capital markets and the insurance industry itself, they responded with a clarity that the courts still struggle to find. The immediate stock drop and the subsequent reversal of that harmful anesthesia policy by Blue Cross Blue Shield, it demonstrates that the economic elite understood the signal instantly.
And they acted upon it out of a very real fear of future consequences, whether those were reputational or regulatory.
And so the central tension remains. The legal system is narrowly focused on establishing the individual legal guilt of Luigi Mangione. But the broader social conversation has already made a powerful collective determination about systemic guilt. It views the policies of UnitedHealthcare as a form of procedural murder.
So if the immense power of public outrage, crystallized by a single act of violence, is demonstrably capable of immediately impacting stock prices and forcing massive corporations like BCBS to reverse harmful policies, an immediate impact that decades of civil legal challenges failed to produce, this raises an extremely uncomfortable final question for you, the listener.
Does the ultimate judgment on the Mangione case rest solely with a jury in the Southern District of New York, who will determine his individual legal guilt under existing laws? Or does that judgment belong to the millions who, having already determined corporate policy to be a form of procedural murder, compel future systemic change in the United States healthcare system through the threat of fear and retribution, rather than through the normal mechanisms of law and policy?
The idea that a single violent act of retribution can achieve more immediate political and economic change than years of measured protest is a deeply troubling complexity that this case forces us all to confront. Thank you for diving deep with us today into the Mangione case, the American healthcare divide, and the difficult questions of accountability in a profit-driven system. We encourage you to continue researching the history of the delay, deny, defend practices and the legal ramifications of the federal death penalty pursuit in this specific context.